Hello, everyone. Welcome into the Psych with Mike studios. We are actually now in the Psych with Mike library, so we have relocated the studio since the first episode, and we are now in the studio that we are going to be broadcasting from for the foreseeable future. I am your host, Dr. Michael Mahon. I am actually solo today because my partner in Psych with Mike is actually, as they say, on assignment. And perhaps we'll be able to speak to him about what that assignment was when he gets back with us next week. But I wanted to take this opportunity to maybe catch people up and let them know what I am hoping to see with Psych with Mike and kind of give people some insight into my vision of the show, but also to maybe expand a little bit on the topic that we had discussed last time. So in the last episode, Brett Newcomb and I had been talking about what our theoretical orientations are. And a theoretical orientation is fancy talk for how a person or somebody who performs psychotherapy thinks about the way that people get distressed in the first place. And so any therapist should have some kind of understanding about where they see the origins of human suffering coming from, and they ought to be able to articulate that. And if they can't, if they don't have an understanding, or if they can't articulate it, then essentially you are a person who is throwing darts at a board in the dark, and that's probably not a great way to do psychotherapy. So let me start off by just talking a little bit about Psych with Mike and my own personal journey with Psych with Mike. I began Psych with Mike as a radio show in January of 2017, and I kind of had given the Reader's Digest version of this in the last episode. And that had followed my doing several appearances, regular appearances on the Dave Glover Show, which is a popular talk radio show during afternoon drive in St. Louis, Missouri. That resulted in me getting a show, and we started the show in January of 2017 and ran the show for that entire calendar year, so until December of 2017, did 50 episodes, and in November of that year, my sister had a pretty significant medical crisis, and the time that I needed to commit to the show just wasn't there, and so we shut the show down. And then just recently brought it back as a podcast to be able to take advantage of what a podcast can do that living by a radio clock can't do. So I love doing live radio, and that was a tremendous thrill for me. And I would hope that at some point in the future, maybe I can do some live radio again. But what live radio can't do is allow me the time to expand on a topic in really great detail and stay laser focused on it. Because when you're doing live radio, you're really kind of thinking about there's an audience out there, and not everybody who is tuned in to this show on the radio necessarily wants to hear a straight, very, very nuts and bolts psychology kind of show. They want to be entertained. And so part of what I was trying to do when I was on the radio was to be entertaining, and maybe I was and maybe I wasn't. That will be left for other people to decide. But we actually got some fairly good feedback on the show, and again, I really enjoyed it. But that show ended in December of 2017, and in September of this year, so September of 2018, Brett and I had been talking about our desire to do a show or do something together for a long time, and we talked about, why don't we do a podcast? I said, well, why don't we bring Psych with Mike back? And so that's kind of how we got started. Psych with Mike for me is my opportunity to present information to a large audience that is both informative, and I hope that we can give you very complex subjects in psychology, but presented in a way that a person who maybe doesn't have a lot of technical understanding of psychology can still understand and make sense out of. But in addition to that, hopefully what we can do is to give people some no-nonsense, insightful, practical information that maybe they can use in their own personal lives, because let's face it, not everybody goes to therapy. Not everybody has the money to go to therapy. And so this is not intended to be a replacement for, or instead of going to a professional and getting qualified psychotherapy, this is designed to help people maybe to understand themselves a little bit better, and maybe to say, hey, you know what? Maybe therapy really could help me, and to seek therapy because of the show, not to use the show in place of psychotherapy. So my hope is that we can give everybody some insight. Hopefully we can also have some fun, but to hopefully break these complex topics down in a way that makes sense to individuals who are listening to the show. So both Brett and I have spent all of our professional lives as psychotherapists. So between the two of us, we have, and I haven't done the math, but I know more than 60 years of clinical experience. But just as importantly as that, we both have been university professors for most of our professional lives. So I personally have almost, at this point now, 20 years teaching at the university level. Brett has a significantly more robust experience in teaching. He was originally trained to be an educator at the high school level, and then started teaching at the university level after he got his degree in counseling. So we have a lot of experience in teaching these subjects to people who are going to go out and do this as a profession, but also even at the undergraduate level for individuals who may not be using psychology as their primary way of earning a living later on in life. So hopefully we have an ability to be able to talk about these subjects in a way that people can wrap their heads around and understand. So my hope is that people will get a lot out of the show, but we also want to be very responsive to people who are listening to the show. So however you got a hold of the show, whether you got us off iTunes or you did find us on the internet at psychwithmike.com, everything Psych with Mike is now located on the internet at psychwithmike.com. So there you can like our Facebook page, which is at Psych with Mike. You can follow me on Twitter, which is at Psych with Mike. Or you can listen to the show, but you can also interact with us. So you can contact us and give us feedback about what you like, about what you don't like, but you can also interact with us and ask us questions. So if anybody has any questions about psychology or just being human in general that they would like to throw our way, we certainly would be welcome and open to getting any kind of feedback that you want to send us. So use the psychwithmike.com page to be able to contact us. And if anybody sends us any requests or any questions, we will certainly be monitoring that and try and be very responsive to that and answer those questions to the best of our ability. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit now about the subject that we had talked about last time, and that was professional orientation. And so Brett had talked about his experience or his understanding of himself being very experiential in psychology, and had talked about what that meant. So for him, the idea of being in the room with the client and experiencing them and reflecting them, so giving them feedback, nonverbal and verbal feedback that makes them feel heard and understood, and to provide what is called a safe emotional holding environment. So giving them a space, and maybe it's the only space that they ever experience anywhere in their world, where they can feel absolutely 100% comfortable being able to be in that space, and they don't feel judged, and they don't feel like anybody is going to ridicule them, or anybody wants to use them or to manipulate them or to take advantage of them. And so for Brett, that is really the import of psychology and doing therapy. And I believe in those things as well. But for me, the real understanding here for me, or the real understanding for me, is that human suffering really is, at its root, is because individuals lack positive skills for emotional regulation. So we're going to talk about that a lot when we are having these discussions. And what does that mean to be able to emotionally regulate? So people really a lot of times maybe don't understand what human emotions are. And in psychology, we don't really always do a good job of explaining that. And that's our fault. It isn't that we don't know what emotions are. It isn't that medicine doesn't know what emotions are. But whether it is because people assume that everybody just innately knows what an emotion is, or because they want to make it seem mystical. A lot of people want to believe that what they do is special, and I'm not saying that it isn't special, but emotions aren't really that hard to understand. It isn't that you breathe an emotion in like a virus and then you have this emotional experience. Emotions are very well understood things, but we don't explain that process very effectively or very often. So an emotion is really just the release of a hormone in the human body. And so human beings are born with the innate ability to experience 4 different kinds of emotions. So glad, mad, sad, and scared are the 4 ways in which the human body can change emotionally, and that's what we experience as an emotion. So we get information in through our sense organs, so through our ears, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, taste, and through our sense of touch. And we interpret that information, then the cortex of our brain, so that's the part of our brain that engages in rational thought, interprets that information and sends a message to an area of our brain called the limbic system. And then the limbic system tells the hypothalamus to either get excited or not get excited. So to have an emotion or to not have an emotion. And the 4 ways in which that can happen is glad, mad, sad, and scared. So those emotions then are the result of the hypothalamus telling the body to release hormones in the body. So there are, in my psychology, in the way that I understand psychology, there are 4 emotions, 2 of which are positive, 2 of which are negative. And a positive emotion is an emotion that a person feels better after experiencing, and a negative emotion is an emotion that a person feels worse after experiencing. So if you think about your own life, then an emotion that you likely feel worse after experiencing is probably scared. So most people, after they get really, really scared, a lot of times they feel worse. So if you think about you're on the highway driving and somebody cuts across 3 or 4 lanes of traffic and skids right in front of you and pulls off of the highway onto an exit that they've almost driven past, then you have experienced fear. And a lot of times after you experience that fear, you don't feel very good. You feel really rubbery legged or rubbery armed, and your heart is beating really fast, and you experience this as not pleasant. So what's going on in the body when that happens? Well, fear is the result of the body dumping a bunch of adrenaline into the system. When that adrenaline gets dumped into the system, the body reacts by speeding up, and it goes into hyperdrive. And as a result of that, the body creates much more waste than the body can realistically flush out. And so that waste builds up in the tissues of the body as lactic acid, which then gets stored in the connective tissues. And that's why you feel rubbery armed or rubbery legged after you've experienced that emotional reaction. So most people don't feel better after they experience that. They usually feel worse. So fear is a negative emotion. And then another negative emotion would obviously be anger. And it operates on a similar kind of plane where the body is in overdrive. And as a result of that, you oftentimes feel worse afterwards. But anger also has this additional component of making people, if you're angry, you're usually resentful to begin with, and people don't really like that. Not only are you experiencing a rise in your levels of adrenaline, but you're also experiencing an rise in levels of a hormone called cortisol, which is a stress-related hormone that generally makes people feel pretty rotten. And so that is a negative experience. So that means that everything that's left must be therefore positive. So what's left? Glad. Obviously, glad is a positive emotion. People experience glad and they feel better. But it also means that sad is a positive emotion. And most people don't think of sadness as a positive emotion, which is unfortunate because the evolutionary reason why we experience sadness is to cope with loss. And evolutionarily, the way that our bodies have evolved to let us deal with that is that when you get sad, your body is designed to allow you to experience that emotion and then to process it and then feel better. And the way in which that you do that is you cry, number one, and tears are almost completely composed of a hormone called prolactin, which is a stress-related hormone. So we literally cry out stress and frustration. That makes us feel better. In addition to that, our levels of oxytocin, when we get glad or get sad, just absolutely skyrocket. So oxytocin is a hormone that makes us feel better. It is essentially the same as getting a shot of an opiate and having that in your body. So that's a very, very powerful sense of good feeling that we get as a result of being sad. But most of the time in our society, people say that they don't experience feeling better after being sad. And the reason is because human beings have the ability to engage in what we in psychology call rumination or persification. And those are both fancy words for feeding back thoughts on a loop. And so when we feed those negative thoughts back on a loop, what ends up happening is that we can continue our own bad feeling in ad infinitum. So if you think about the difference between a human being and a dog, most people have seen a dog and most people know that dogs have emotions. And if you think about it, have you ever seen a dog get sad? Probably. Have you ever seen a dog get glad? Yes. Have you ever seen a dog get mad? Absolutely. And have you ever seen a dog be scared? For sure. So dogs have the same emotional life as human beings. The difference is that a dog doesn't have a cortex. Therefore, the dog doesn't engage in rumination. So a dog won't buy an assault rifle and hide behind the couch waiting for people to come home at night. So it is this process of being able to feed the negative thought back on a loop that actually creates a tremendous amount of our distress, and it prohibits us from being able to experience to the fullest extent the positivity of the emotions that nature has given us. So let's think about something else for a minute. We've been talking about this idea of the generation of emotions and the difference between a positive emotion and negative emotion, and the fact that a dog has the same emotional life as a human being. And all of these things may be true, but how did we originally learn how to be able to deal with these emotions in the first place? So for me, the underlying foundation of all of our emotional regulation comes from the period of 18 to 24 months after birth, even before we learn how to use language. So even before you knew how to talk, you were learning how to regulate your own emotional reality. And the ways that you were learning that was through a process of mirroring, twinship, and idealization. So we're going to talk about those terms. Those are terms from Heinz Kohut that I've talked about in the past. So Heinz, like the ketchup, Kohut, Kohut. And I will put in the show notes a link to an article it's a scholarly article, so some people might find it difficult to read, but it will be there available for anybody who wants to look at it. And it talks about these three concepts of mirroring, idealization, and twinship. And basically mirroring is being reflected for things that you do well. So if a little baby claws its way up the leg of a piece of furniture and takes a couple of tentative steps, and the mom swoops in, scoops the baby up, kisses the baby and says, "Oh, what a great baby. You're such a fantastic baby." Does the baby want to do that again? Absolutely, of course. Now, if the baby claws its way up on the leg of the furniture and takes a couple of tentative steps and starts to wobble and falls backwards on its diaper, and everybody starts laughing, "Ah, ha, 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 ha. Look at that baby. What a silly baby." Does the baby want to do that again? Probably not. So that is an example of mirroring. So when we are mirrored, then we start to interpret a sense of security based on trust. Can I trust the world? Do I feel secure in the world? And if the answer to those questions is yes, then we develop this innate sense of trust and security that we carry with us for the rest of our lives. If the answer is no, then we develop a sense of insecurity and mistrust that we carry with us for the rest of our lives. But we then idealize this external object. So the parent is the external object. We idealize them and we look at them as the absolute model of everything that is to be human, because we don't know any different and we don't have other examples. And so we idealize whatever is presented to us. So if that model is bad or inaccurate or incomplete, we still idealize them, and then we form a merger with them, which is called twinship. And that is the process that when I talk about psychology, I call an introject. So we take the example of that caregiver and we make it a part of us, a part of our personality, and we carry it around with us. And then that is what we carry for the rest of our lives. And so in psychology, a lot of what we are trying to do is to identify what was that process of modeling and introjection that the client got as they were very young. What was that process, and how has that impacted their ability to emotionally regulate in their lives today? So are they capable of emotionally regulating effectively? If not, why not? And if not, is that a repairable situation? So some things that we experience, that we are exposed to, are difficult to fix. Now, is anything completely unfixable? I mean, we can get into a deep dive on the difference between what is biologically coded in us and what is socially experienced and then carried around in our psyche. But the truth is, in my experience, in my estimation, a lot of that is correctable if the individual is willing to be introspective enough to look at themselves genuinely and sincerely and do the work to be able to correct it. So they have to be willing to trust in the relationship with the therapist enough that they experience essentially a reparenting whereby they are open to creating a new idealization and to introjecting a new and different kind of modeled behavior that might be more effective, that might be better, might be healthier. The problem is that for most of us, the pain of the known is always preferable to the fear of the unknown. So human beings tend to be very reluctant to move themselves out of homeostasis. They would rather stay where they are than, even if they believe that that is unhealthy and is not profitable for them, rather than do the work to get to a healthier place. That just tends to be human nature. So we have to overcome that. That is what is called resistance in psychotherapy. And by creating a desire, so creating that safe emotional holding environment and creating in the client a sense of safety and security can help them to be able to get over that sense of resistance and be able to enter into a relationship with a therapist that can lead them to healing. So I hope that that was a little bit helpful for somebody out there. And again, we would really love to hear from people. We want the show to be evolutionary. So if we're doing something that you like, please let us know. If we're doing something, or we could be doing something different, please let us know that also. If you have any questions about psychology in general, or just being human, psychology specifically, or just being human in general, please let us know that as well. And this is Dr. Michael Mahon, and I will be back next week with new episodes of Psych with Mike with my partner, Brett Newcomb. See you on the other side.